Den 17 januari 1945 förs Raoul Wallenberg bort från Budapest av sovjetiska soldater och kommer aldrig mer tillbaka. Vad hände med honom? Var han fånge nummer 7 som levde efter det officiella dödsdatumet? Och påverkade Sveriges handelsavtal med Sovjet Raoul Wallenbergs livsöde? Det ska vi prata om i kvällens avsnitt av Närbild. Välkomna! Ja, med mig idag har jag Susanne Berger direkt från Virginia i USA. Hon är forskare som har forskat mycket på Raoul Wallenberg. Och hon har också varit oberoende rådgivare för den svensk-ryska arbetsgruppen som försökte bringa klarhet i den här frågan. Varmt välkommen Susanne, roligt att du vill vara med oss.
Oh, nice to see you.
Ja, du förstår svenska men du föredrar att prata på engelska så du kommer prata engelska här idag. Jag tänkte börja med att fråga, vad var det som fick dig att bli intresserad av Raoul Wallenberg?
Well, it really started because of my father. When I was in high school, we had an assignment to write an essay about a person we admire. So you know how it is when you're young, you're like, oh, whom do I admire? So my father said, well, you know, there's this guy, Raoul Wallenberg. You should look into what he did and what he stood for. So this is really how it started. But then in the 90s, I was writing and researching for various newspapers, and I wrote an article on the release of the CIA documents in the Wallenberg case, and that's really how I got involved.
Jag förstår. Hur många timmar tror du att du har ägnat åt Raoul Wallenberg?
I have no idea. It's a lot. I mean, we have worked intensively on this, but it's nothing in comparison to what Wallenberg's family has been investing in this research ever since he disappeared. His parents and his brother and sister over more than 7 decades. So it's nothing compared to that.
Vi ska prata lite mer om den senare delen av Raoul Wallenbergs liv, den allra sista tiden. Det är lite svårt att veta hur lång den var, men vi kan börja med att prata om hans sista dagar i Budapest. Vad vet vi om den tiden?
Well, we know some of what he was doing and thinking from the reports of his colleagues and also from some of the reports of the Soviet officers that he met during those last days. So we know that he was in a fairly optimistic mood. He was glad and obviously elated that Budapest was liberated from Nazi terror. At the same time, was grave concern about needing to continue the protection and supply of the Swedish homes, which housed hundreds of thousands of, or rather about 150,000 Jews that had survived under the protection of the neutral countries. So he was both happy, but was also looking forward and was very much focused on obtaining, the necessary protection from Soviet authorities.
Och vad hände sen?
Well, what happened is that he was detained by the Soviet military counterintelligence officers whom he encountered. And there are some new questions that have arisen in recent weeks about this, because it appears that contrary to what we've known before, that Raoul Wallenberg may have actually asked himself to be put in touch with Soviet officials or to go to Moscow. So this may have changed a little bit the dynamic of his detention and arrest. But regardless, he was isolated. He was not allowed to communicate with the outside world, and he was taken by train to Moscow, where he and his driver and assistant Vilmos Langfelder were placed in Lubyanka prison on February 6, 1945, and held there at least until 1947, when Soviet authorities say that Wallenberg died of a heart attack or was killed in some form.
Vi ska återkomma till det. Men vad hade sovjeterna för anledning att arrestera honom? Varför gjorde de det?
There may have been many different reasons why Soviet officials were suspicious of Wallenberg. Here was a young diplomat from a neutral country engaged in rescue activities. Basically, all foreigners in Hungary were suspicious to Soviet officials in the sense that they may have been engaged in intelligence activities or activities that were aimed at against the Soviet Union. So it's entirely unclear, and we know that Wallenberg, did try to obtain protection for the Jewish quarters. So again, this may have raised some suspicions, but at the same time, we do not know what exactly was reported up the line of the chain of command to Soviet officials. We do not know about the interrogations that were conducted in Hungary already. We have never seen those documents. So it is not entirely clear what was reported to the Soviet leadership and Stalin, but at the same time, it is clear that Stalin may very well have been aware of Raoul Wallenberg's last name and may have felt that it was that he might be potentially useful. And there were other foreign diplomats who were taken, so but it remains very much an open question.
Mm. Du nämnde här att det har kommit uppgifter nu då att han kanske själv ville till Moskva. Varför skulle han ha velat komma dit i så fall?
Again, it's not clear. It may be that he felt that it was necessary to make contact with the top Soviet officials, not just the military authorities in Hungary, in order to seek protection for the Jewish houses. At the same time, he had also expressed plans to create a huge new organization, post-war organization for the reconstruction of Hungary and restitution of Jewish property. And he clearly realized that he would need Soviet cooperation if this was going to become a reality. So we do not know. He also had expressed to friends and colleagues that he was hoping to return to Sweden via the Soviet Union, but that was before the military situation had declined and had become so precarious. So it's really impossible to know, but it's definitely something that must be followed up, because obviously such a request could have enhanced Soviet suspicions and would have been reported, and we have not seen any of this documentation.
Förstår. Och vi vet i alla fall att han kom till Sovjet, och sen är den stora frågan då vad som hände sen. Vilka olika teorier finns det om vad som hände sen?
Well, we know that Wallenberg was held in Soviet prisons, in Moscow prisons, until at least the spring of 1947, when his trail breaks off. His paper trail breaks off. The main theory is obviously the Soviet claim that Raoul Wallenberg died either of a heart attack or execution sometime in July 1947. At the same time, new information has surfaced that shows that he was clearly alive 6 days after his official death date. The question is, did he then continue to live longer? Was he held as a prisoner under investigation for some time? There is so far no indication that he was ever sentenced or charged with a crime and then sentenced. That witnesses report that he was, or that they had information that they had heard or actually had contact with Wallenberg in many of the various Soviet prisons and camps after 1947. But unfortunately, none of these witness testimonies has been corroborated. So the most prevalent theory is that Wallenberg died in 1947. But again, many questions remain, and especially now that we have some confirmation that he was alive 6 days after his official death date.
Mm. Det finns ju uppgifter om att han då var fånge nummer 7. Kan du berätta något om det?
Well, in 2009, FSB archivist informed us that a prisoner number 7 had been interrogated for more than 16 and a half hours, together with Wallenberg's driver, Wilhelm Schlangfelder. And this information really is, at the time that they said also that most likely this prisoner number 7 was Raoul Wallenberg. So this is really clearly the strongest indication that the official Soviet claim that Wallenberg died on July 17, that the official version is incorrect. And there are some other implications, obviously, to this, because you should remember that the Russians have obviously had this information for decades and had it also during the 1990s when the Swedish-Russian Working Group was investigating Wallenberg's fate. So the question is, why did they not share this information? And the reason possibly is that they did not wish to create great publicity, which undoubtedly this information would have caused. On the Swedish side, it's not clear exactly what Swedish officials knew about this. One thing that is clear, that is when they learned of this sensational new information, which is really the most important piece of information regarding Raoul Wallenberg's fate since the Gromyko Memorandum, which claimed that he died in 1947, they did very little. They did nothing. When they actually, in 2011, when Russian officials did confirm that Raoul Wallenberg was prisoner number 7, they classified the information, did not inform researchers or Raoul Wallenberg's family. So the result is that in 2012, when Sweden was celebrating the 100th anniversary of Wallenberg's birth, and when there was a lot of focus, international attention on Sweden and on this event, nobody was aware of this information. And to top it off, in 2019, as late as that, Swedish officials did not reveal the fact that they had received confirmation from the Russians that Raoul Wallenberg was prisoner number 7. And this information only came to light by accident. So this question really remains very much at the center of the Wallenberg case, and the Russian side has to now reveal and provide all information related to the identification of this prisoner.
Mm. Vad kan det finnas för anledningar till att man inte gick vidare med den här informationen från svensk sida?
It's difficult to say. We do not know exactly what happened in the 1990s. The Russian side informed the Swedish officials that Langfelder had been interrogated for 17 and a half hours, but they never provided a copy of the actual document, of the actual pages from the prison registers. This basically reveals one of the major flaws of the investigation, because we did not have access to original documentation for the most part. We had some access, but we didn't have some crucial access, and this really remains, a major problem with the investigation, and remains a major problem today. It is unclear what happened in 2011. I cannot speak for the Swedish officials why they did not make this information public, but it raises a lot of questions.
Vad gjorde de svenska myndigheterna för att försöka få honom fri i början här runt 45, 46, 47?
Well, they did not do very much. That's very clear. And, this is why Swedish Prime Minister Göran Persson in 2001 issued an official and formal apology to Wallenberg's family. And it is particularly disturbing because one has to wonder why Swedish officials really were so eager to accept that Raoul Wallenberg was either dead or could not be saved. This very much disturbed my von Darda, Raoul Wallenberg's mother, to the point that she accused Swedish officials of wanting her son dead, using words like she considered their conduct cold-blooded. So it was definitely not a very good moment for Swedish officials. And it took until 1951 until they actually, for the first time, formally requested Raoul Wallenberg's release from the Soviet Union.
Mm. Och den här anklagelsen från Rauls mamma hade väl antagligen att göra med då att Moskva-ambassadören, Sveriges Moskva-ambassadör Staffan Söderblom hade i möte med höga ryska tjänstemän och även med självaste Stalin i princip bett om att få en dödsattest på Raoul Wallenberg. Och forskaren Peter Axelsson, eller analytikern Peter Axelsson, menar att detta kan ha haft att göra med att Sverige höll på att förhandla fram en handelskredit med Sovjet. Vad skulle du säga om det?
Well, you know, previous investigations had essentially focused or had concluded or had proposed two things. They had concluded that Swedish passivity in the Wallenberg case was mainly due to a set of really unfortunate circumstances. One was an excessive Swedish fear of Russia, chaotic post-war conditions, individual failures, etc. They had also concluded that the negotiations for this huge Soviet-Swedish trade agreement, essentially that the important phase of this took place only in August 1946, meaning 2 months after Söderblom's disastrous meeting with Stalin. So meaning after Raoul Wallenberg's fate was essentially sealed. So what has become clear now is that the negotiations were very much on the agenda when Söderblom had his meeting. So Peter Axelsson's conclusion is that Swedish officials apparently felt that they could not do two things at the same time. They could not try to conclude this trade agreement and at the same time ask pertinent questions about or press the Soviets for, about Wallenberg's disappearance. So the result of this is that in certain ways, Sweden may have made a conscious decision to prioritize its other interests over the need to clarify what happened to Raoul Wallenberg. And what made matters worse is really that at this particular moment in time, Swedish officials, including Söderblom, had actually received very strong indications that Wallenberg was alive and that he was in the Soviet Union. At the same time, Stalin had also made it very clear that he wished to reduce political tensions with the Swedish side. So the key question that arises from this and from Axelsson's very important research is that why did Sweden not take advantage at this moment of this golden opportunity? Matter of fact, even when they concluded the trade agreement in record time, they did not raise Raoul Wallenberg's fate. Has never been answered why, but this really goes to the heart of the question of Swedish passivity, and there's now, it really leads to new questions about the conduct of Söderblom, but also of other Swedish officials.
Mm. Hur tror du att man reagerade från sovjetiskt håll när man hörde då att svenskarna mer eller mindre ville höra att Wallenberg hade dött?
Well, it's difficult to assess because we only have limited access to internal records of Soviet authorities, meaning also internal, correspondence records. But there was some sense of bewilderment, that's for sure. They could not really make sense of what happened. I think particularly, when Söderblom made his statement to Stalin, it's clear that after Söderblom left, Stalin had a long consultation with some of his top advisors. So they clearly didn't know what exactly to make of this.
Mm. Vad tror du själv hände Wallenberg efter det här?
I have tried very much not to engage in speculation because I feel very much that we must now focus on obtaining the information and obtaining access to documentation. There are so many different theories and so many different competing ideas. And what we really need to do is we need to get access to the documentation that we know exists, and then we can take stock, and then we can assess which theory is correct, which theory is not correct. Very clearly, the Russian side has not told the truth about the essential part of the Wallenberg case, which is that, it is now clear that most likely Wallenberg did not die on July 17, 1947. So Russian officials have acknowledged this themselves. So the question is, what happens next? And this is the fundamental problem, because Russian officials claim that they have no further information that could clarify the circumstances of Wallenberg's fate in Soviet imprisonment. The Swedish side has tacitly accepted this claim, even in, with clear indications that this claim is highly questionable. Russian officials have repeatedly lied, and they lied to the Swedish-Russian working group by withholding crucial pieces of information in a 10-year investigation. If we had had this information about prisoner number 7, it is quite clear that the whole investigation would have taken a very different path from the start. And so this really is something that we need to focus on. We need to get access to the documentation that we know exists, and we have to stop pretending that it doesn't exist.
Du har ju mycket kontakt med Raoul Wallenbergs familj, vilket framförallt är brorsdöttrarna nu. Vad är det främst som ni vill ska ske från rysk och svensk sida nu?
We have presented a very thorough catalog of questions to both Swedish and Russian authorities. In Russia, clearly we want access, and we need access to the documentation we have requested, and we need answers to the questions we have posed. That's number one. In Sweden, clearly there too exist many questions that remain unresolved. There, in particular, as I just mentioned earlier, the question is why Sweden was so ready to accept that Raoul Wallenberg could not be saved, or that he was dead already in 1945. Aside from the important questions raised by Peter Axelsson's research, new findings show that Swedish intelligence operations in Hungary during World War II may have compromised Raoul Wallenberg in Swedish eyes. These operations began much earlier and were much more extensive than previously known. They were conducted in cooperation with Anglo-American intelligence as well as Hungarian intelligence entities, and were in part directed against the Soviet Union. So the question is, what was the perception by Swedish officials of Raoul Wallenberg, and did the fear of potential revelations of serious neutrality violations in Hungary in any way affect the Swedish handling of Raoul Wallenberg's disappearance in 1945, but also in later years? So these are some of the crucial questions that need to be addressed. What did Swedish officials know? Who knew it? And what did they do? What did they decide to do? So these are some of the essential issues that need to be probed, and they need to be probed soon. Another question remains very much about the actions of some Swedish officials, including Sverker Åström. We have a situation where we now know that Sverker Åström was, posted. He was in Stockholm during 1944-45. He was later, for more than 6 decades, in charge of the Raoul Wallenberg case, or very much involved in the handling of the case. And yet we have a situation where he has been suspected of having functioned as a Soviet asset, but 75 years after Wallenberg's disappearance, we still do not know the answer if he was or if he was not fulfilling this role. As all these questions need to be solved.
Yes. Du nämnde här att du inte vill spekulera så mycket, men om du ändå skulle gissa, hur länge tror du att Raoul Wallenberg levde? Vad är troligast?
Again, it's very difficult to say. I have learned not to speculate, as I said, and not to guess, because the facts point in the direction that Wallenberg may have been held for some time in Soviet prisons under investigation. It is possible that he was kept quite a bit longer, and we do not know what happened then, but it is very clear that Russian archives contain very crucial material that we have not seen and that we must get access to in order to determine what happened, after he was apparently investigated and interrogated very long and most likely very brutally in 1947. We have not seen the investigative files of Raoul Wallenberg's fellow prisoners, which could provide very important clues about, the kind of information or Soviet officials wanted to obtain, or what their plans were procedurally. So I can only say that it is clear that the official Russian version, Soviet version of Wallenberg's fate is not true, and that the Russian side has gone to some length to obscure this fact, including during an official investigation of the case for 10 years in the 1990s. So that is, of course, that poses a huge question mark.
Yes, vi har inte så mycket programtid kvar här nu, men en sista fråga som du får svara på lite kort. Raoul Wallenbergs mamma sa på sin dödsbädd: fortsätt kämpa för Raoul. Tror du att sanningen kommer komma fram till slut?
Absolutely. I have very little doubt, because this case was too important. It was too complicated for Swedish and Soviet relations. And there's far more information that exists in both Sweden and Russia, but also in possibly other countries, because we have just seen that the new findings and new research raises important new questions. Old assumptions are being challenged, and there are answers to be found in both Russia and other countries. So I'm very confident that the information can come to light and that this mystery will be solved.
Yes, vi får hoppas det. Tack så jättemycket, Susanne, för att du har varit med oss. Och tack till er som har tittat. Varmt välkomna att titta på nästa avsnitt. Då kommer vi ha med oss riksdagsledamoten Mikael Oskarsson som ska prata lite om hur han tycker att svenska myndigheter har hanterat frågan om Raoul Wallenberg.
Om du vill hjälpa oss här på Himlen TV7 att göra fler program och serier i arbetet för att sprida Guds glada budskap, stöd oss gärna med ett ekonomiskt bidrag. Du ser uppgifterna här i rutan. Tack för ditt stöd.